on.
Fair enough. So, and welcome Susan and Yvonne and Cantor and Melinda and the Berkmans and Joan and Marie. It's wonderful to have you. And I know my topic isn't quite certainly is not as heavy as the protocols of the elders of Zion. I don't know if Groggers doesn't sound like quite the academic exercise. And part of it is that it's very tactile. It's very kinesthetic. But I've been growing lima beans because I like making Groggers. And there's a teaching that I heard about in a recent podcast. I was listening to a podcast called Home Cooking, and they were talking to Josh Molina about making latkes. And Josh Molina said something really interesting. He says, yeah, Jews, we do something and then we figure out what story we were telling. It's a powerful comment, because what it says is that we realize we live in a world of action, but then the Jewish response is, wait, what did my action mean? What story am I connecting to? Why am I doing this? Which was just such a beautiful way, because I do it all the time and didn't realize that what I'm doing is learning something from my own Jewish tradition and culture and training. And how often I've done it. And I said, oh, I like growing something. What do I want to grow? Well, let me grow beans, because rather than making metal and plastic Groggers, why don't I grab these mint tins that I finish off, fill them with beans I grow, and then we get a great Grogger. Wow. Well, if I have that, I should be teaching what's the importance of a Grogger, because why just make a Grogger when we also should be, why do we have these things, right? Why do we have the Groggers that we use on Purim? Why is it fun to be able to make that noise? And some of you were at our services last night. We did a Megillah reading. And what was interesting to me is people didn't really have Groggers, but we had some booing. And it was noticeable as we were going through the story when you could hear the boos and when you couldn't, and how that impacted the experience of the story. So I am going to take you on an adventure of a Groggery nature. And what is the history of the Grogger? Why do we use Groggers? What are we supposed to be thinking about when we use Groggers? What I'm doing is two different things. One is I want to teach you the matrix of ritual, text, and artifact. Everything in Judaism runs through rituals, the matrix of ritual, text, and artifact. The ritual is the action, the text is the story, and the artifact is the physical object we use. I'm sitting here on the bima and I can point to 18 of them right from here. I've got candlesticks over here. The candlesticks are the artifact, the blessing is the text, and the ritual is the lighting. I have a Torah scroll. I can go on all day about that, right? I've got a menorah behind me. That ritual, text, and artifact is something really important as we are going through our Jewish life, because not just that every motion you do, oh, what's my ritual? What's my text? What's my artifact? Although that is fun, I think there's something powerful as we do stuff in Judaism, just like Joshua Molina said. We do something and then we figure out what the story is. That there are times where it's powerful and meaningful to stop as we pick up an artifact and think about, wait, what's the ritual in the text? Or if we're telling a story, what's the artifact connected to it? So to use that matrix as a way of being conscious about how we're moving and what we're doing and what we're handling. So that is my goal for this morning, in addition to get every time you see a Grogger or make a Grogger or have a Groggery experience, that you know what that Grogger is coming from. And so I am going to do a share screen with you. And I am going to pull up my chats and participant list in case, and Cantor, you are here, and Cantor, you are not a co-host. You are now a co-host in case someone comes in and I don't see. And if folks have questions, please feel free to ask. I'm just trying to get a screen so I can see everybody. So there, and again, I'll drop it into but this is a Google Doc that you can open and then hide, but this is all of the texts that I'm going to be sharing with you this morning. So I wanted to start with the text. This is the text, the Groggering text of Esther, introducing us to a guy named Haman. Thank you. And so this is kind of where it starts. After these things, did King Ahasuerus promote Haman?
Ooh.
Son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, and advanced him and seated him above all the princes that were with him. All the king's servants that were at the king's gate bowed and reverenced Haman.
Ooh.
The king was so commanded concerning him. Mordecai bowed not, nor did him reverence. Thus the king's servants which were in the king's gate said unto Mordecai, why are you transgressing against the king's commandment? And it came to pass when they spoke to him daily, he hearkened unto them, and they told Haman to see whether Mordecai's matters would stand, for he had told them that he was Jewish. When Haman saw that Mordecai bowed and did not show him reverence, Haman was full of wrath. And so he scorned to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they showed him the people of Mordecai. I had no idea that it was this archaic in the language I pulled from my translation. My apologies. Wherefore Haman sought to destroy all the Jews that were throughout the whole kingdom. So if he went after Mordecai alone, it would show up as political assassination. If he goes after and murders all of the Jews, then that would be okay. Okay. So this is the beginning of the enmity between Haman and Mordecai and all of the people of Israel. But here's the key. Here is the thread that ties all of this together. Haman was a son of Hammedatha, and he was an Agagite. So he is a descendant of Agag. Okay? And everybody knows who Agag is, right? If you don't know who Agag is, that's okay. Agag is a king of a people called Amalek.
Okay.
Thank you, Cantor. Amalek appears in Exodus as the people of Israel are wandering through the wilderness, and Joshua has to do battle with them and appears a few other times. And here, right before the Purim story, we get this, and we read it last week as part of our maftir of our extra section of Torah, is Parshat Zachor, or is from Shabbat Zachor, is this statement in Deuteronomy. Remember what Amalek did to you on your journey after you left Egypt. How undeterred by fear, he surprised you on the march when you were famished and weary and cut down all the stragglers in your rear. Therefore, when the Lord your God grants you safety from all your enemies around you in the land that the Lord your God is giving you as a hereditary portion, you shall blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. Do not forget. It's an incredible statement that in Torah you get this line. Blot out the name of Amalek from under heaven. Don't forget. It is a paradox. It is a contradiction. It is so incredibly powerful, and it's the basis of the Grogger.
Never.
What was that? Blot out. So don't erase, don't cover, don't destroy, but blot out. Pick it up, put ink over it, cover it up, the memory of Amalek. And don't forget, and every time you give this instruction, you're saying what? You're saying the name of Amalek that you're supposed to be blotting out. You want to blot out the memory. Don't forget to blot out the memory. It's a paradox and yet a powerful one. It's kind of like we don't want to talk about the protocols of the elders of Zion. We don't want to talk about the Holocaust, but we can't forget. So how often do we put ourselves in trauma? What kind of trauma do we put in? But we can't forget our trauma, because if we forget our trauma, then we're destined to relive it. But if we remember our trauma, then we're always reliving it. And so what sense does that make? And then everybody wanted a solution at the end of learning about the protocols of the elders of Zion. So how do you stop spreading the protocols of elders of Zion without mentioning the protocols of elders of Zion? So somebody says protocol, somebody says shakes up a grogger. So the groggers are part of the solution. There's the text, there's the story. How many of you are familiar with that?
No.
So as kids, you're sitting there with those groggers in your synagogues as you're hearing the story of Esther and shaking them and not being aware of this is that basis of it. We're supposed to be blotting out the memory of Amalek. Don't forget. There's the text. Now for the ritual. What's the action? How do you erase the name of the man who's mentioned repeatedly in the Megillah, which we read during the festival? So I missed one step here. Agag is a king of Amalek that Joshua does battle with. Haman is a descendant of Agag. So Haman is a descendant of Amalek. Therefore, if we're supposed to blot out the memory of Amalek, don't forget, you're supposed to do what to the name of Haman? Blot it out. And isn't it interesting that we blot it out in multiple ways? Because not only do we use groggers, what is the other thing we do in order to forget about Haman?
We drink.
We drink. You're supposed to drink yourself into such a stupor that you just don't care anymore. But only on one day of the year, right? And it's just an incredible response. How do we acknowledge that we have villains in the world, that we don't memorialize them, right? This is a conversation about all of these Confederate statues. How do you remember your history, even the bad and ugly bits, without either glorifying it or honoring it or giving it more weight than it needs to? And it is such a delicate dance. Cantor, I'm glad you're eating Hamantaschen. That is entirely appropriate. Think about that one. What do we consume during Purim? We eat Haman's hat. We make part of Haman or his ears. We rip his ears off and eat them in the form of cookies. It just adds a little bit more to the ritual. What flavor are those?
Chocolate ganache with salted caramel.
Ooh, traditional. Okay, so how do we erase the name of the man who's mentioned repeatedly in Megillah, which we read during the festival of Purim? And I will also add, even as I say this, I think there's part of it for adults and there's part of it for kids, because we want to give the kids something fun to do so they listen to the story. And if they're always having to listen, because if you hear the name Haman, what are you supposed to do? You're supposed to hit your grogger. And so it's a great way it's a great way of engaging people with different intelligences and awarenesses. So here we have some of the ritual. Rabbi Abraham, and some of these I will have cited. Some of them I copied and pasted from a text long ago, and I don't know where they're from, and my apologies to the author and apologies to you that I can't tell you where they're coming from. And I am dropping one more time into the chat window. This is a Google Doc that actually has, and we'll again share it after the fact. And yes, Marlis, we are recording. I followed my instructions that I wrote. So that if you want to see all of these texts, you can. So Rabbi Avraham ben Natan writes in the 13th century. Okay, so this is 700 years ago. Young boys would take pebbles from the stream, write Haman on them. They would knock the stones. Why does it think I'm playing music? My computer is asking about playing music. I don't know what it's doing. Because I'm singing. See, that's my singing. Would take pebbles from a stream, write Haman on them. They would knock the stones together while citing the name of Haman and his crimes, and the name of the wicked shall rot. This idea gained popularity among European Jews and would manifest in various ways, such as breaking clay pots or banging on synagogue tables with one's hand or with wood sticks prepared in advance. So we can see this even 700 years ago. Even 700 years ago, there was this instruction to blot out the name of Amalek was being done in Purim, but it was being with stones and sticks. 300 years later, Rabbi Moshe Israelis also wrote of a custom popular among children who would bang pieces of wood or stone with the name of Haman on them, all with the purpose of erasing the name of a wicked foe. So they would actually write the name and bound them so hard that the name would then get obliterated. The other thing I've heard is people wrote it on the bottom of their shoes, and they would stomp their feet as they're listening to the Megillah, and that would clear the name away. So here's the Jewish piece of ritual. Here's another kind of explanation of it. In the olden days, there was a custom in many communities to make a dummy in the likeness of Haman, boo, and destroy it on Purim. This custom was stopped in its place. In its place, another custom came. So they would kill Haman in effigy, but it was stopped. They would write the name on the bottom of shoes, wipe it on the floor or sidewalks to erase it. Others would write the name of Haman on the floor of the synagogue, wiping their shoes over it to erase the name. And this came the custom to stomp the feet at the mention of Haman during the reading of the Megillah. The stomping of shoes gave way to the creation of loud noisemakers, or the Grogger. So I am curious as you were growing up, what do you remember from the reading of the Megillah? What were your ways of making noise?
We use the Grogger.
In my Orthodox synagogue, we stand, and after every aliyah, the man would go out and drink himself drunk.
So they're drinking in Groggers. So now, I'm not sure what happened there. Okay, we are going to get to the artifact. So we've talked about that was the Jewish ritual. That's the Jewish text. Here are the artifacts. These are some different kinds of Groggers. You can see here's one with Haman leading Mordecai on the horse. Here's a very ornate silver one. There were other ones that as you swung it around would make it look like Haman was being hanged. You can see here's an elaborate wooden one with the gears. Give me 1 second. So here's one. And this was the form of the Grogger that you would see, where you have a flapper and you have the gear, and as the gear goes around, it knocks the flapper. There's a very elaborate silver one with jewels on it. So you can see there are all kinds of different costs in metal and wood and the metal plastic ones that we have in abundance today. And I will just throw in my environmental sustainability note. Isn't it more fun rather than buying more metal and plastic ones to grow our own and use recycled vessels? And then when you're ready, you can either throw them in your soup or throw them in your garden and grow the next generation of them. So then I found this picture because I was curious about the history of a Grogger. I mean, what do we know about Groggers? Oh, Rabbi Birnholz gets to have a big one because he's the rabbi, so we can have one of these big ones. And the kids get the little plastic ones. And sometimes at the end of New Year's, the grocery store will donate their noisemakers from New Year's to us, and we have those in the box too. But that's kind of what I knew history-wise. I mean, I knew about the blotting out of the name of Amalek and some of the wood and the stones and some of those history, but I wasn't sure about this device. And how did we start? Because I'm guessing that Mordecai and Esther weren't walking around with these things, right? So where did it come from? So you can see this picture. What is this picture? Well, tell me what you see in this picture. Is it a Purim picture?
No, it was like a military picture.
Looks like a military picture.
Looks very hazmat-y.
Very hazmat-y.
Wearing goggles.
Goggles and gas masks. Okay, so isn't that it's a great picture though? Especially when you see, what are they holding in their hands? They are holding Groggers. And so the Grogger has this rattle thing has a really incredible history, but it starts in the church. And we'll talk about the secular and religious history of these rattles. And then the big question is also then how do you go from a rattle that was in the church that found its way into the secular world and then into the synagogue? And then I have a challenging question because I came across a whole nother article. And as we talked about, as I mentioned earlier, there are places where they used to just kill Haman in effigy. Can we ever get too enthusiastic about celebrating our enemy's demise? Is there such thing as booing, as being too loud in booing? Because, if you had a non-Jew come to listen to the Megillah, they might look at you like, wait, what's going on here? Okay, so those are some of our questions that we're going to be talking about as we look about this artifact. So the history. The rattle got its first break as a stand-in for the quotidian noisemaker, the bells. The bells in churches have gone together for so long, it's hard to imagine one without the other. Since at least the 9th century, there's been custom not to ring the bells during the Triduum, the 3 days preceding Easter, out of solemn respect, okay? And so what would happen is in order to tell everybody it was time to come to church services for the 3 days of the end of Holy Week, people would walk around instead of bells with rattles. And it became part of the texture to say, look at us, we've changed the sound to say there's something different happening. We do something in Judaism that's an analog to that. What is something where we introduce a sound to tell you get ready for a holiday? What's our other noisemaker other than the Grogger?
Shofar,
Yeah, and when do we start blowing the shofar?
the start of the new year.
We actually start in the month of Elul, right? There are practices of starting to blow shofar in Elul saying, get ready, high holidays are coming. Get ready, high holidays are coming. The rattle did the similar thing in the Christian world centuries ago to say, here we're at the time of Easter, we're not using the bells, this is a different time, okay? Now, these were, and again, kids rather love them. There's another darker one that we'll get to, come back to in a little while, but that was part of where these came from. Now, what's great about a rattle is it's very portable, right? Look at this. I was putting this in my pocket the other day as I was walking around. These are, and the sound carries, and I can make a lot of racket. And so this became beneficial. This was the original police siren, right? Before cities had police departments, they had night watchmen. In 1658, Peter Stuyvesant, then General Director of New Netherlands, organized 9 men to patrol what would become New York City to pursue, attack, and capture pirate vagabonds, the arrest robbers who would wish to inflict injury and damage. And so they would walk around with this. This was their way of saying, alert, alert, we have a problem. It became the rattle, known as the Rattle Watch. And after the devices, they carried the sound the alarm. 20 years earlier, Boston had also had a Rattle Watch. And over 200 years, both cities supplied their officers with rattles. I had no idea. Isn't that incredible? The rattle was perfect. It was less than a foot long, flat and L-shaped. You could even make them that they could fold down. It was easy to carry, and the noise came with the flick of a wrist, operated with one hand. If you're running, you can do this. If you're standing, and you could probably whack somebody over the head with it too. It was cheap, and unlike their elaborate church counterparts, patrol rattles are simple affairs. It was ideal. Now, it eventually got, how many of you have seen your police walking around with a rattle?
No.
Anybody? Why not? What did they get replaced with? Think of
Whistles.
whistles. Yep. The P whistle replaced the rattle because, again, even smaller makes a much louder and stronger noise. They figured out how in a small package to be able to generate that much noise, and that replaced it for police work. Which brings us back to our picture, which this. Why, during World War I, was the Grogger, the rattle, perfect for in case of gas attack?
Because they would, in case of to warn
They
people
were-
of a gas attack.
People that something was happening.
What was the one problem? Why couldn't they use a whistle?
Because it sounded like
Because
the
they're covered,
military.
because their face is covered with a gas mask.
If your head is in a helmet and your face and ears are covered with a gas mask so you don't die, you can't blow a whistle. But you can have a very loud rattle. And so that is what this picture is, that the rattle made a comeback in use around the time of World War I, because they were used to signal everybody and tell everybody that there was a gas attack and put on your gas masks. They're a great way of sounding a warning. Absolutely a phenomenal history. And when we look at the toys today, remembering, so this was something that was used for centuries to tell people, wake up, alert, there's a problem, something you need to pay attention to. Now, here's where it starts to get a little bit more dark, because it wasn't just to tell people to come to services or alert. They were actually, these rattles in churches were used for something a little bit darker, and that plays into how do we use them and what is the backstory and how do we understand them for Purim. The custom of using Groggers on Purim was likely born out of a popular folk tradition common among middle-aged Christians that held that such noisemakers contained the power to exorcise demons and evil spirits. Oops, someone is coming in. Groggers were used during weddings and violent storms. During the buildup to Easter Sunday, when church bells were ordered silenced, Groggers were used to summon Christian worshipers to prayer. On the eve of Easter, Christian youths used Groggers to beat or punish Judas Iscariot. And from there, we assume the custom extended to Jewish Ashkenazi Jewry who beat the figure of Haman the Wicked. So here's where it starts. So first of all, they were used, I wouldn't want to be holding a metal rattle, spinning it in the middle of a thunderstorm, just saying. But here you have the tornado sirens, but also to scare away evil spirits. But this last line, Christian youths use Groggers, rattles, to beat Judas Iscariot. So this is where it's really kind of dark and scary that we're still using them. And there's a twist and paradox. The place where children first encountered the rattle was the church itself, as part of a ceremony called the burning of Judas. This is the moment when our story takes an unsettling turn. It's also the key to understanding why Jews eventually adopted the Grogger for use of Purim. So this author, excuse me, I'm going to sneeze, hold on. Pardon me. This author is saying that it's not just, well, they got used and they're great noisemakers, is actually saying it's because of what I'm about to share with you that we use them as a way of kind of, I'll say it like this, sticking our middle finger up at the Christians who are using the story of Judas to go after Jews, and turning the Christian use of the rattle on its head to fight back, which is absolutely fascinating. The burning of Judas was never officially sanctioned by the Roman Catholic Church or the Orthodox Church, but it was common practice in Europe until 20th century and still frequently performed in Latin America. I'll also draw your attention as we're talking about this. Have you all heard of passion plays?
Yes.
As my dad is telling that about, was doing a session on the protocols of the elders of Zion, a lot of that stuff is also built into these passion plays. Those same tropes get built into passion plays. This, what we're about to read with the burning of Judas, or the attack on Judas, is tied into that same thing, that there are places in Christianity. Look, it happened to me. I was getting a ride from the dealership where my car was being serviced. I was driving with the driver. I was wearing a yarmulke, and the driver told me I was basically going to hell because humans can't be good, and the only way we can survive is if we have Jesus to protect us, right? So I'm being told I'm going to hell, even as I'm being taken back to my car while it's being serviced. Passion plays, this ritual, it's still going on to this day, and it's still scary stuff. While details vary by location, the basics are the same. An effigy of Judas is first hanged, then burned. It was in the context of the ceremony that the crotalus, that's the rattle, first morphed from church object to child object, as children responded to the flaming effigy by twirling their rattles in celebration. So as Judas is being burned, the kids are celebrating by shaking by using these rattles. It happens today. You can find images on Czech anti-Judas rattle procession. I did not actually look for that. Ain't that scary though. Early on, the rattle's distinctive sound became part of the ritual. Elsewhere, people understood it to be violent sound. Some compared to the sound of nails being driven into Jesus's hands.
Oh,
It was heard as a grinding noise, the grinding of Judas's bones.
whoa.
In some communities, from medieval Germany to 19th century Malta, the grinding of Judas's bones represents a distinct ritual involving the mass twirling of rattles. The grinding ritual didn't always use rattles. In some places, kids just smashed things on the ground. Doesn't it sound a little familiar? Right? This is the same thing we were doing to Haman. I don't know if there's a chicken and egg, if this was happening in the Christian community and we said, wait, that's pretty cool. Let's do that to Haman, back to him. I'm not sure if there's a chicken or egg, or if how much they knew each other, they saw each other doing it. Were they doing some one-upmanship? Here's the other good thing. Purim is happening before Easter. And are we saying, look, we know you're about to do this. We're going to send a message before you get to Easter time. It is likely, though, these semi-sanctioned ceremonies, rattles came to be a general purpose toy. Isn't that lovely? So it was such a fun object that, you know, you don't only have to use it when we're talking about death and destruction and burning people in effigy and grinding their bones. We can just use it whenever we want to make noise, whether it's at our soccer matches or at weddings. I was going to go for something more uplifting my dad, but I don't think I ended up there. Okay. Out of this body and frequent anti-Semitic rattle ritual, the Grogger emerged, the brilliant piece of ritualistic judo. Jews appropriated all the violence and anti-Semitism contained in the rattle and flipped it. Whereas the crotalus castigated Jews for eternity, and Jews by extension, the Grogger vilified Haman, the antagonist of the Purim story, the incarnation of Jewish persecution and perpetual outlet of Jewish revenge fantasies. Okay, so we said, look, we're going to take it and we're going to turn it into our own. And do we take some? I guess there's a question. Does knowing this, is it helpful? Is it scary? Does it add to your enthusiasm for using the Grogger, or does it say, wait, we need to do this in a different way? Joan just harumps.
I just said interesting question.
Yeah.
Would not use it again.
So Len says, I'm not going to use it again.
Can I tell you in an analytical way? I think when people feel anger and frustration and fear, instead of hitting each other, sometimes we take things and throw them. Sometimes we stamp our feet. I mean, everybody who's ever had a child who throws tantrums sees evidence of that. And I think that particularly in a congregation, when you're celebrating the victory of good over evil, people need to emotionally play out the anger, the frustration, and fear. And so that's why instead of throwing ourselves on the ground, we take something and make noise.
And I think, Vivian, you've got and Cantor, I think I saw your hand up too. I think there's something powerful here that you're talking about. It's not a keva issue, it's a kavanah issue. It's not an issue of the artifact or the action. It's what's the story we're going to tell with it. Are we going to use it to say that this is all about us destroying Haman? Or is this letting go of releasing our fear or our anger or our frustration in a loud barbaric yelp, for example, as a way of saying, this is going on. This is a chance to release. Cantor Keel, I think you had a...
When I was a child, I tried to reach back, and when I was in a congregation and we were celebrating the Purim, it was my way of getting back. It was my way of saying, you're not going to kill me. It was my way of getting back.
Cantor, you had a comment?
I think, I think these rituals could have grown at the same time and been analogous to each other because, when you think about it, Haman, boo, 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 is considered to be the most evil person in all of our Jewish lore. And for the Christians, Judas is considered to be the most evil person because he betrayed Jesus. So, it almost makes sense that this concept, these rattles, these groggers would have been adopted by both groups to blot out their respective evil people.
Exactly.
And
that's what I wanted to say.
Fight back against them.
Yeah, so I don't know that one story necessarily takes away from the other, but it does when we use it. How are we using it? Why are we using it? It's not just to use it, but to really tell a little bit more of the story. Here you can see very much what we're talking about. History doesn't deny the existence of individuals. The extreme psychological disorders doesn't assert that one needs to be sick to carry out the most brutal and hideous of crimes. You have Hitler, Eichmann, thousands, and they keep going on. The Grogger in the hand of a child on Purim is there to remind us of how to relate to evil. Like Amalek, it must be erased, not by labeling it as sick or psychoanalyzing it away, but in calling what it is evil and dealing it with bluntly as it would deal with us. And so part of the Grogger is just, this is Haman's evil. I'm going to scream and throw and bang things in that general direction. Len.
Why don't we, when we discuss World War II and somebody's giving a lecture or we're talking about it and we use that man's name, why don't we drown him out?
Fair enough. I don't know that there's a direct connection between that man, he who must be not be named, and Amalek. He clearly is an Amalek of our time. There are a few different Amaleks of our time. And wouldn't that be an interesting practice as we're having our observances of Yom HaShoah that we adopt that practice? There's a fair question to ask, should we? Here's the last piece, and I'm watching the time because I want to give Cantor a chance to get ready for her session and for you all to get to your sessions at 11:30. There's a film called Ratatouille.
Great.
And Ratatouille is a fantastic film. I just lost my stool that I was sitting on. No worries. It was time for me to stand up anyway. Ratatouille is a fantastic film. It is definitely a little, it's fanciful. It's about a rat who's really good at cooking. But in order to cook, he has to ride on top of a guy's head and control him by holding his hair. There's a whole crazy storyline. If you haven't seen Ratatouille, I have a copy. Watch it. It is quite an amazing film.
We've got it on tape. It's wonderful.
Yes, and we've shown parts of it at services before because it really is. There's a lot going on in Ratatouille. What happens at the end, though, this is kind of the genesis of this teaching, is there's the closing scene is the human, Linguini, has a restaurant. Ego, the restaurant critic, goes there to eat every night. But Remy, the rat, is happy up in the rafters. He gets to run his own kitchen. His family lives happily in the rafters in safety. And they all look like they're all happy in their place. Here's a little bit of a commentary that raises that question. Is there something where you get too much Jewish pride or you get too loud that ends up causing more trouble, and that you actually have to be careful about how loud, noisy, or visible you are? The rats eat trash in Ratatouille because they eat trash, because they have to eat trash. Like that of historical position of Jews in post-Christianized Europe, where because handling money was considered impure, they were forced to become bankers and moneylenders. Consequently, Jews developed a deadly reputation for being money obsessed, a reputation that Hitler used to justify their extermination. Coincidence that the scurrying rats in Ratatouille look like those of Hitler's propaganda films. And for that matter, why does Django, that's Remy's father, have a hooked nose? Remy's disgust at his family's trash eating is almost like Philip Rothian and how he resents the cultural fate he's been dealt. If humans think of rats as trash eaters and rats continue to eat trash, there'll never be any escape. To quote Roth's in Portnoy's complaint, do me a favor, my people, and stick your suffering heritage up your suffering ass. I also happen to be a human being. So if you always act like you're in this downtrodden position, you'll never actually get ahead. Why are we still stuck in this position and in this place? And if we keep being downtrodden, that's all we'll be. But Remy, unlike Roth, is not a human being. He's a rat. And the movie's way of dealing with that fact is, in my opinion, decidedly dark. At the end, the rat world and the human world are not reconciled. Anton Ego Linguini knows Linguini's secret, keeps it to himself, choosing to benefit from the genius rat eating at his restaurant every day without giving him the glory he deserves. Okay, so here you're going to get a little bit of communist proletariat theory that the ego, the food critic, is living off of the rat's labor but keeping the rat down in his place. Remy's fellow rats, while happily noshing on Remy's food, are doing so in what I took to be a restaurant's attic, the attic. Sure, those rats look happy, but they're still in hiding. And hiding in the attic has undeniable resonance for 20th century Jews.
Whoa. I never thought of that in the movie.
I know. And I read that and I'm like, oh, yeah. So how
Thanks
much
for
do you
ruining
think?
It's
Pixar
supposed
for
to be like a happy, fun seminar.
We're Jews and it's Purim. And we shake our groggers for our angst and our noise. One night a year, we get to make as much noise as we want, and then we put our groggers away. One night a year, we get out and we get to drink and party and be as stupid and silly as we want, and the rest of the year we put it away. And
But
only
the question
drinking.
is, should we be putting it away? Shouldn't we be out there and loud, just, and drowning out the others that are making all this noise?
How do you fight against this was kind of where my dad ended, right? How do you fight against the big lie without but at the same time not let it grow, not fertilize it, right? How do you stand up to the anti-Semitism? How do we crush our Hamans or blot out the memory of our Hamans without turning into those children celebrating the death and the crushing of Judas's bones, right? We had that actually when Cantor read the Megillah on Thursday night, and she did all of the death of Haman's sons in one breath because we don't want to celebrate their death. It's just a fascinating tension and paradox of the Grogger. Is there a point where we get to be too celebratory where that causes problems, or are we not celebrating enough and we need to be? So we have probably about 2 or 3 minutes. Discuss. Melinda's now really thinking about this.
Well, there's a difference. There's making noise and there's celebrating, and they can be two different things.
And there's a time and place to release our anger, but we also have to be careful where our anger and our frustration goes. Right? Because you can turn your anger and frustration that you're releasing into the world can be released on someone else. And at the same time, and this is one of these things about the Grogger, we can't just stick a plastic thing in our kids' hands and say, when you hear Haman, make sure you make as much noise. There has to be something where we're telling the story and saying, wait a second, there is danger in our world. There are people that do evil things, and this is part of our screaming and saying, stop, we're not going to let you do this. right? There are times where we need to be a vocal upstand. This actually came up in a rabbinic circle where somebody said something racist in a presentation. The rabbi didn't want to stop the presenter and was trying to say, when do I be an upstander? Do I be an upstander in the middle of the Zoom meeting? Am I an upstander after the fact? How much noise and what kind of noise do I make? This was a big issue in Billings, Montana, the story of the Christmas menorah. It divided the congregation. Did they want to get out because there had been attacks on Jewish families? Did they want to be vocal and get out and stop the racism and anti-Semitism, or did they need to circle their wagons and just protect their community? And it actually ended up tearing the congregation in half in some ways because they weren't sure which answer to take. And you thought it was just a simple toy.
Yeah.
And that's why at Purim, you're getting both and. We both have this terrifying, scary story, and we also have all of these incredible rituals for joy and silliness. How do we find ways of laughing at ourselves? How do we find ways of empowering ourselves? How do we find ways of challenging the violence and cruelty in our world? And how do we also make sure we're not being the cruel person full of xenophobia and senseless hatred? Any other thought? Joan, I think you got muted.
Phone was ringing. That sounds like another study group for all three temples.
Well, the simple answer is it's all ongoing study. Just really quick, for those who are interested, on March 10th, my dad and I are going to be doing a lunch and learn at noon about honoring your father and mother. We also have on March 9th, Rabbi Richard Address will be doing a second presentation on Judaism and aging, and talking about the ways that community is conceived in our day and age. And we have the next installment of the Treasure Coast Jewish Film Festival, which is called Keeper, which is about a German SS, I believe, prisoner of war that turns out to be a phenomenal goalie and gets taken over to England and helps win the FA Cup in 1956 while he's married to his Jewish bride who doesn't realize he's a Nazi or formerly a Nazi. And then once it all comes out, he then gets support from a rabbi. Talk about a crazy story that actually is based on a true story, correct, Vivian?
Yes.
It is a true story.
It is a true story.
And happily, just so that everybody is not intimidated by the British, not the British, but the Manchester or Liverpudlian accent, it's going to be an open caption film, so that even though it's in English we can't